We have quite the episode for you today. I'm not in my normal sitting position, but I feel that there was so much stuff to get out. And unfortunately, I don't have exactly the maximum amount of time I normally have to set up. So we're just going to have to do it right from my normal computer spot. Getting right into it, Apple just had their Worldwide Developers Conference, and I felt it was rather muted in terms of AI, but they did have an AI section. And I found what is very interesting is that if you look at Apple's AI event and you compare and contrast it to Microsoft's AI event, they said the same thing. But people's perception is completely different because of the way that the two companies have framed what they were doing. Now, recently there was a interview between Tim Cook and MKBHD, and Tim Cook was asked why the use of generative AI in your products, because generative AI, for the most part, has been thrown under the bus in terms of what it's been outputting. For instance, with Gemini producing very liberal takes of history or not allowing certain races to be shown. And they asked, why did you allow generative AI on your platform? And Tim Cook said that the usage of generative AI and how it's used is to be done in a thoughtful way where the direct benefit is always a focus on users' privacy and that it benefits their lives. And if you compare that thinking to Microsoft, where they want AI to be deeply involved in your life, whether it's appropriate or not, you end up with a situation where people are very disturbed by the invasiveness that AI has on Microsoft's platform, but they're not disturbed by the level of invasiveness because they're both using OpenAI with how the data is being processed. People aren't disturbed by the invasiveness of AI being on Apple products. I mean, well, Elon Musk is disturbed by OpenAI, so much so that if any deep integration truly happens between OpenAI and Apple, he will forbid people from using that iDevice in anywhere in X. He'll just have them check it in the door, put it in a Faraday cage or otherwise. And I could see why he really doesn't like OpenAI. And sure, there's that. But you also have a lot of other deep questions that Microsoft and Apple both simultaneously try to address and absolutely fail to address. And what I mean by that is this: if a user on their Windows laptop is using AI to create and produce or build company products, then by necessity, company data is going out in some manner. How is that being controlled? To a third party. Which third party? Is it Azure? Is it Microsoft? Is there an agreement in place? Is it OpenAI? Are they now getting access to this data? And it's being processed. Now, Microsoft claims that it's being processed on device, and for those that it can't, it will then send it out to a third party. Apple does the same thing, processes it on device and then sent out to a third party like OpenAI. The only difference is that one has some trust and is slower to implement what I ultimately see they will implement, which is deep AI agents embedded inside the operating system, because that's where the industry is going. And you need that in order to really have AI be more useful. But you got to wonder, well, why is it that people are so willing to give Apple a pass for doing the exact same thing as Microsoft? And the difference is that, wise men are slow to go where fools rush in. And am I calling Microsoft a fool in this? Yes. Yeah, actually, I very much am. They had a huge advantage with deep integration with AI, but they're so desperate to turn that into what are actually useful features, like the ability to go back into a timeline and see, hey, what was I working on like several weeks ago? That's actually a very genuinely useful feature. But when it comes from Microsoft, people don't trust it. Well, why don't they trust it? Because Microsoft is shown to be an inadequate caretaker of our own personal data, in fact, even of the operating system. In many ways, they view the operating system as an extension of Bing ads, and it shows. When you fire up the first time your version of Windows, well, what happens? You're either filled with tons and tons of manufacturer built in spam and spyware that no one really cares about. I don't know how many times Norton's been pre installed when it really shouldn't, but because the manufacturer's getting kickback, or Microsoft themselves embeds ads into the start menu. And at one time, they were going to embed ads into the Explorer that people just don't have the trust with Microsoft doing that. Furthermore, because Microsoft was so focused on building the feature, they didn't realize that maybe the feature is actually a really, really bad idea. Let me just paint you a picture of like how terribly bad this idea is. Let me go with nurses. They sit in front of a computer. All of the nurses that I know, they're sitting in front of a computer with Windows on it. Now, Microsoft claims that you could turn the timeline feature off. But let's be real here. Microsoft has claimed many things. Microsoft has turned them back on. Absolutely. And then what you thought of, oh, I opted out. In reality, you've suddenly been opted in because the update just chose to ignore your preferences. There is no more goodwill left with Microsoft. So let's get back to the nurses thing. A nurse is in front of a computer entering in patient information, HIPAA information. Legally, you could end up in a boatload of hot water if that ever got out information, including their username and or their passwords or something. And it's already been shown that this can not only be hacked, but that anyone who, for whatever reason, ever gets access to that computer could go back and pull that information and find people's information they ought not to. And that's just one industry. Defense industry, national security, all these things can now potentially be logged and have that data because believe me, Microsoft won't just let it be processed on device. At some point, they are going to want to have this as trading data. How do I know? Well, they wouldn't have this feature if they didn't have any intention of using it for telemetry, how people are using their machine. This just provides a new avenue for telemetry. And that ties back into Mac. Macintosh will end up eventually having that same level of deep AI integration. I am interested in seeing how its thoughtful approach will be more beneficial for the user. This is where, I don't want to be a negative on Windows. This is where I actually think Windows has an advantage. And I'll come from an Apple's perspective to prove it. You could use Swift, Apple's own programming language, to tie into a bunch of apps, and you could have the AI then engage with those apps and be able to perform work on your behalf. But Apple chose to have the AI just give you instructions because they know that their core demographic is a little less trustful in terms of jumping into the deep end with technology. So they're a little slow in that regard to what they could have the AI do, which is actually perform those actions. And this is where Microsoft comes in because Microsoft showed in their demonstration, I have every inclination to believe them, that if you push a button, it will then actually do work on your OS to troubleshoot. And I don't know how many times you've gotten a phone call from someone that needed technical support that's in your family. And wouldn't you have loved it if there was a button there that they could press that will actually use AI to troubleshoot the problem for you so you don't have to get that phone call? Well, that's going to be in Microsoft's implementation. And eventually, it's going to be in Apple's. Now, we do need this deep integration on device running locally. And I did see this coming. In fact, I've been talking about it for quite some time that Apple has the advantage with their neural processor. Microsoft has been way on board in terms of their Qualcomm devices. And now with AMD and Intel all trying to get on board to have that local AI processing. But they're not really being very forward in telling you that these things are going to be massive RAM sinks. Apple sees that problem. And so whatever you're not able to do on device, they could send up to a private processing. But you're going to need gobs of RAM. And this is why I think Apple had the advantage because you can get gobs of RAM on a laptop. It's going to be very expensive. You're talking about like $4,000, for a MacBook fully equipped with that, but that would allow you to run Llama. That would allow you to run all these massive models without having to quantize them down. And Apple recognizes that. And you could see that they're doing exactly like I predicted. They're loading up their processor with gobs of RAM, throwing it in a server rack mounting it, and just letting that do the processing using their NPU. And that's the way I would like it to be, whether you do it on local or whether you want to scale up to massive, always cloud deployed instances, that you're going to have that capability where then the AI could run, perform work. And, whether you're using Integrate, which is now make.com or Pabbly or any of these other platforms to have the AI do stuff for you, you're eventually going to be able to run localized agents. So that's all I have for my take on the Apple and Microsoft comparing and contrasting the two. And I will catch you in the next one. See you next time.